Welcome, this is Anton reporting live from ISC, but not live from Frankfurt. And we are here today with Erich Strohmaier, who is leaving Berkeley lab, but who is not leaving the top 500. So, welcome Erich.
Hello Ed, thank you for having me.
Okay, so can you tell a little bit about 20 years ago? How was it then with supercomputing? Do you still remember?
I remember, certainly I remember things. And looking back and looking at today, I actually see that there is a lot of similarities in the situation which we had in the early 90s when we started the Top 500 project, 1993, and today. So in the early 90s, we had the attack of the killer micros, and we had a lot of changes in the landscape of computers. There were a lot of newcomers, new companies building systems like Thinking Machine, the Connection Machine, like building the Intel IPSC Hypercube, N-Cube, Candle Square Machine. There were a lot of architectural innovation was going on. The Cray YMP and the T90 were still the big old guards, the guards of the old type of architectures, but there was a lot of innovation going on, and it was driven by the old technology, being ECL as a chip technology, having reached its limits. Now, today we are in a very similar situation in some ways. In the mid-2000s, the NAR scaling broke down, and now we are approaching the end of Moore's law. And the effect is the same as in the early 90s. The effect is that there is a lot of innovation going on in terms of architectures, and we see a lot of companies developing chips nowadays, often specialized for applications like artificial intelligence and machine learning. But again, there is a lot of innovation going on, and that is reflected in the top 500 again by us seeing a lot of new architectures coming into the list, and customers, especially research labs, being willing to try out these architectures to get an advantage and to make progress in their ability to advance science and to produce more cycles for science.
Yeah, actually, yesterday you presented the latest top 500, and especially the top 10 was completely shaken up with 4 newcomers, and even, well, you tell it yourself, what happened at position 1?
Yes, so we had 4 newcomers in the top 10, and the top 1, and the supercomputer Fugaku, co-developed by the Japanese research institute Riken CCS and by Fujitsu, is the new number 1. It's almost 3 times as fast as the previous number 1, the Summit system at Oak Ridge National Labs, built by IBM and Oak Ridge National Labs with NVIDIA chips. And Fugaku is interesting not only because it's a Japanese system again, but especially because it is clearly a new architecture, which in some ways actually is very reminiscent of old architectures. It uses ARM cores on the node as the compute cores, but they are improved, and they have added very wide vector lanes to those ARM cores, which provide a lot of performance to the chip overall, and that is reminiscent to the architectures we had in the 80s and 90s. The architecture is very well understood, the basic architecture, and Fujitsu and Riken combine it with the TOP500 network, 3rd generation of the interconnect, proprietary interconnect by Fujitsu, which stands TOFU. By the way, is a tongue-in-cheek acronym. It actually stands for toroidal fusion. And together between the toroidal fusion network, TOFU network, between the hybrid memory cubes Fugaku is using for achieving very high memory bandwidth, and between the vector cores, vector-enabled ARM cores, Fugaku achieved almost a half a petaflop, 415 petaflops on the Limpec benchmark. Okay. The system is also very interesting because the vector lanes are built in a way that with reducing the precision you can increase the performance, and they have demonstrated that by running a new benchmark called HPL-AI, which is reminiscent of a lot of the codes which are used in machine learning. They run that benchmark in 16-bit precision with a peak performance of 1.4 exaflop, the first such measurement above an exaflop. It also shows that nowadays a lot of these new architectures are geared towards new applications, and Fugaku is very well positioned to work with codes from the machine learning and from the artificial intelligence.
The Fugaku also has a special interconnect, I think, yeah.
Yes, it does. It has a new version of the proprietary Fujitsu interconnect called TOFU. And TOFU is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek acronym because it stands for Toroidal Fusion Network, which Fujitsu had developed for the K computer and has been using in their own line of supercomputers. So TOFU D is the newest version of this, and it's tightly integrated on the nodes of the Fugaku supercomputer and the corresponding Fujitsu commercial product, and is one of the reasons that Fugaku can achieve such high performances and efficiencies on a lot of codes.
Okay, so that's about the Fugaku, and we hear a lot about it already from lots of people. And there are also other new machines in the top 10. Is there anything interesting to say about that? Yes, of course there is.
Oh, of course there is, yes.
Yeah.
There is one system which comes to mind, which is Selene, I believe on position number 7, which is which is built by NVIDIA in the US and installed at NVIDIA. So that already gives the first indication that because NVIDIA is so big in the machine learning market these days, that is geared towards machine learning. That's probably one of the applications they're using it for, not just traditional floating point computations, but actually machine learning applications where the NVIDIA GPUs are certainly very prominent in the market these days.
Yeah, and it's not the only commercial system in the top 10. Yeah.
No, just before it is the second new system in the list, which is at position number 6, I believe, 5 or 6, is a new system in Italy. It's installed at a commercial company, NISPA, and it's one of the highest positions any such system installed at a commercial customer, industrial customer, has ever achieved in the list. We only had a...
Yeah. If you look at it a bit broader, how are commercial systems or installations at commercial sites doing overall?
So the commercial market over the years has been actually the bread and butter market, has become the bread and butter market for large-scale computing systems. However, at the very top end, in the top 50 positions, we have mostly research installations. So research centers, if they can, they buy larger systems than industry typically does. Industry is more oriented on cost efficiency, so that they don't buy machines for prestige and for really pushing the edge as much as government-funded research institutions typically do. The two marketplaces, the industrial and commercial marketplace and the government research and academic marketplace, do have very different profiles in terms of they tend to buy different architectures, and they tend to buy from different companies as well. Also, the distribution between the ratio between those two markets in different countries can be very different.
Yeah, so if you look at the vendors for those systems, I think you can see quite a big difference there, can't you?
Yes. Yes, the commercial market nowadays is totally dominated by the three big Chinese manufacturers, Lenovo, Inspur, and Huawei, who are producing the lion's share of systems for the commercial markets. At the same time, most of those systems are actually installed in China, which makes China these days the biggest consumer of supercomputers in terms of number of systems. That's very different from, let's say, the research market, where the US, Japan, and Europe are still very dominant in terms of number of systems, and they tend to buy from American, European, and Japanese manufacturers, not from Chinese manufacturers.
Yeah. So the number 1 is also the first ARM-based system in the top 10. Is that a change in architecture, or is it just exchanging Intel for ARM and nothing else?
Well, the way Fujitsu and Riken went about it, it is both. The ARM architecture allowed them to have a very cost-efficient base architecture, which they could then accelerate, which they could then improve by adding their custom vector units to the ARM core itself. And that's certainly something which is very appealing to a lot of vendors in the market, to have an alternative to Intel, to the very tightly controlled Intel base chip architecture. And a side effect of this is that the vector units in the ARM chip are very tightly integrated with the CPU itself, which is something which is much harder or not possible to do if you stick with Intel.
Yeah, and so you think that there will be a growth, that we see more and more of those ARM-based systems?
There has been rumors about it for some time, so I would not be surprised. But currently, we only see 4 systems, ARM-based systems in the top 500, 3 of which are based on that new ARM chip by Fujitsu, which is Fugaku, which is a commercial system from Fujitsu, the new product line, which is equivalent to Fugaku, installed at Osaka University, if I remember correctly, and the smaller test system by Fujitsu itself. The 4th one is actually an interesting one because it's installed in the US, and it's based on the Thunder ARM implementation. So it is an American-built, American-installed system. It's an alternative to the Fujitsu system.
Yeah. In Europe, they're producing, or they're working on a processor, the European Processor Initiative, the EPI, which is also based on ARM, but uses a RISC processor to get speed. Did you have the possibility to look into that architecture or not?
I'm not familiar in detail with that, but as I said earlier, particular appeal of the ARM solution is that you can integrate any units you use for actually achieving your top speed, achieving performance. You can integrate that very tightly with the processor, be that vector units like Fujitsu did, be that something like advanced RISC core and other things. You're not forced to put your accelerator like a GPU on the other side of the PCI bridge or anything like that. You can put it much closer to the core, and that helps a lot with optimizing and reducing data movements and things like that. So that is a big appeal of the ARM architecture, and that's, I think, one of the big advantages, which makes me believe that we're going to see more of these solutions in the future.
There's a lot of shaking going on in the top 10. Does that hold for the whole top 500?
So this time, actually, no. This list is really special in the sense that we had a record low turnover. So if you just look at the end of the list, how many systems from the last list didn't make it this time because they didn't make the threshold, that are beyond 500. That number for this list is 51, which is almost by a factor of 2 smaller than anything we had seen ever in the past. It used to be 200, 250 systems. The last 5 years or so was more on the order of 100 systems fell off the list. The slowdown there is due to the breaking up of the NAR's law and how that affected the market. But this time we really saw a dramatic decrease in the turnover in the list. And it's, of course, the interpretation is open. It's hard to make an interpretation. Be sure about it with one data point only. We think it's a confluence of a continued slowdown in the increase in speeds of our chips, which slows down procurement cycles, together with delays in installations or even outright cancellations of new installations due to the current pandemic situations with COVID-19.
The Fugaku and also other new systems are also geared towards artificial intelligence and especially machine learning. So what are the developments there?
So the general trend, of course, is that in the commercial market as well as in the research market, the deep neural networks have caused some sort of a revolution which started about 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, and has really picked up speed the last 5 years. So nowadays, very many centers, many commercial customers are very interested in the topic, and they want to be prepared for it on the hardware side. That's why the ability of an architecture to really accelerate machine learning algorithms has become very important. One aspect of that is that architectures which can reduce the precision in their calculations and gaining speed when they do that are really very advantageous. That's a general trend we are seeing in the market, and the Fugaku is one example. Selene, the NVIDIA system, is another example for this type of architectures. So the installation sites are very much getting ready for machine learning at large scale. Even so, currently architectures might still be different. Overall in the marketplace, of course, there is installations such as the clouds at Google or Amazon, where companies have their own custom accelerators, and you can only access them really if you sign into their clouds. So that's a different business model. That's basically hardware as a service business model, and we're going to have to see how this plays out in the future. Which of the business model, the outright ownership or the hardware as a service, is going to win out in this market. But big data and particularly machine learning is certainly one of the very hot topics in high performance computing in general these days.
Okay, thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you very much for having me, Emin.
For Premier Magazine, this was Emin reporting.